So this is our panel on the state of energy, and it's going to be moderated by Jim Rossi, who holds the Judge D.L. Lanston Chair in Law at Vanderbilt Law School. And so, Jim, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ann, and thanks for putting together such a terrific and esteemed panel, which you'll hear from momentarily. I teach energy law here at the law school, and this is really a historic moment to be teaching and thinking about the energy system and the way we regulate and approach it. We're going through a transformative time in terms of how we think of the energy grid. It's transformative when it comes to energy supply, right? If you look at over the last decade, we've replaced a predominance of coal with natural gas. A lot of that is going on in Tennessee as well as nationwide. We've seen renewable energy grow to, as EIA describes it, about 22% of our power generation portfolio. But more than 10% of that is wind nationwide, not in Tennessee. But Tennessee has made some certain progress on that front as well, as we heard about this morning. There are a lot of other transformations going on too, transformations with the grid and how we think about interconnection, and transformations with how we think about energy use. We heard this morning, for example, about the shift in transportation and electrification of transportation and other activities that have historically been taken care of by natural gas and the like. So the way I'm going to conduct the panel this morning is by just briefly introducing each of the panelists in turn, and then asking a question of each of them, and that'll hopefully stimulate some conversation about some of these transformative issues that are going on and how we're thinking about them in Tennessee and in Nashville. Dr. Joe Hoagland is with us today. He is Vice President of Innovation and Research for the Tennessee Valley Authority, which really needs no introduction, of course, to us here in Tennessee. But as we know, it is a corporate agency of the U.S. government that spans 7 states, parts of 7 states in terms of its service territory, and that makes it the largest public power provider in the U.S. So I'm going to start with Joe by just asking the question, Dr. Hoagland. Could you tell us how TVA plans to meet the challenge of balancing reliability, cost, and sustainability goals over the next decade or two?
Yeah. So. Good afternoon, everybody. Easy question.
I told you it'd be a softball.
Yeah. So I think start with the fact that we are in this very transformational time, right? So I like to think about what I call the traditional energy system, which was big power plants produce energy, they put it on a transmission system, distribution system, comes here, turns the lights on. The system that we're moving toward, we'll probably still have some of that large generation, but it'll have to be different than it is today. It will have distributed generation throughout all kinds of places. We will be electrified in ways that I think we're still trying to sort through and imagine, and that'll all have to get moved on a power grid that is not linear like it used to be. Power will go multiple directions. You'll have to have all kinds of sensors. Probably even need AI at some point to actually balance and manage and make everything work. So we have to figure out sort of how to make that transition. And as was mentioned a minute ago, at the same time, nobody in here wants the lights to go out, right? And so making sure reliability and resiliency stay at the forefront is critical. People also don't want to pay higher prices than what they have to, and so we have to keep that balanced. And in the end, we also have to eliminate carbon from the system. So it's trying to balance like all 3 of those kinds of things. So the direction TVA has been taking, we've been retiring our coal plants. Coal fleet is retiring out. Bull Run, large plant up in Knoxville, was the latest to come off out of the system in December. We're looking at timing for taking the rest of the plants out. We're looking at then how do we replace those plants? What do we replace them with? And the 2 primary things we've been working on there is solar and natural gas. We're trying to supplement with battery storage. We'll have a new battery storage plant actually hopefully online in about 2 weeks. It's not huge, 20 megawatts, but it's a place for us to actually learn and understand how it behaves on the system. And we have a pretty well-defined plan that will get us to about 80% carbon-free over the next 10 or so years. Once you go to 80% carbon-free and then you're trying to go to 100%, that part's not clear on exactly how we're going to get to it. Hence my job, innovation and research, right? That's the part. Basically, if people ask me what's my job, well, the job I think I've been given is figure out how do we get to 100% carbon-free with new technologies, because that's what it's going to take. New generation technologies, new ways for the grid to integrate and interact. And so from a process standpoint, we're currently doing a new integrated resource plan where we're looking at the generation sources and what they will look like. We're in the process of developing a scope of work to do an integrated transmission plan. So we'll be able to look at the transmission system. And then we've got a number of efforts going on with our local power company partners like NES to try to figure out, as their systems become more complex, how do we think about working those systems together, integrating them in a way that provides power for the customers. So we don't have the answers yet, but we're beginning, I think, to move in a direction where we know how to address them. So I'll stop there. And
Thank you. I might borrow your mic here to introduce Teresa. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. And Teresa Broyles-Alpin serves as the President and Chief Executive Officer of Nashville Electric Service, what we know here is NES, of course. And NES is one of the 12 largest public power utilities in the U.S., municipal utilities in the U.S. Its annual revenues are approximately $1.5 billion. Teresa, could you tell us a little bit more specifically about how NES is working as a local power company or distribution utility within TVA's territory? How's it working with retail customers to help implement some of these goals, as well as what additional goals might have been set by NES or by the city of Nashville?
Excellent. Thank you for that, the introduction and the question. I was on this panel last year and outlined things I wanted to do, and so I'm really happy to share with you in a few minutes some of the things we've accomplished. So some of the things I said last year, I plan to do this, want to do this. We've done a lot of those things now, and there's even more we'd like to do. But I have been in my role a little over a year and a half, and so I'm still relatively new as the CEO at Nashville Electric Service. And I've been working hard during that time to lay the groundwork for leaving my mark on the organization and kind of making the way it's running at the top mine. And one of the things that I did early on, and had actually started this before I took the helm, was working on an ESG strategy and framework. Because with regard to the question of how we balance reliability, cost, and sustainability, I felt like that ESG strategy would help us prioritize directions that we needed to head and identify things that were low-hanging fruit for us to pursue. And I'm excited about a lot of the things that we have in the hopper now. We have historically been a reliable, low-cost energy provider. That's been the mantra since the late 1930s when the organization was founded. And providing low-cost power, reasonably priced power to our customers and providing it reliably is still vitally important. But I feel like we can be a little bigger than that. I've added sustainable to those goals now because I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I think those can all work together. And that's been a focus for me in the time that I've been in this role. And before I dive into the details about some of the initiatives we have underway, it probably makes sense to lay the groundwork by giving you some information about our relationship with TVA. Because we buy all of our power from TVA. We have a 20-year all requirements contract with them, which means that we don't really have the right to go buy power from anyone else. We have to buy it through TVA. The latest edition of our contract, however, gives us the flexibility to do some purchases outside of dealing directly with TVA. And we're allowed up to 5% of our purchases to be from somewhere else, which sets it up for us to invest in some renewables for our customers, independent of TVA, which has been a big deal for us. And so with our intent of using all of that flexibility under the contract for renewables, I started working on that before officially taking the helm also, because it was going to take a while to get all of that in place. And we have now identified some of those priorities and opportunities that I outlined for those of you who were here last year. I outlined some of those at a high level, but now we actually have things lining up. One of those being an opportunity to purchase 135 megawatts of solar from a utility scale solar project being built by Silicon Ranch. That was pending last year when I was here. At least we were in the early stages of figuring that out. But at this point, I've taken it to my board for approval, and we have signed a contract, and that happened in the fall. So that's a super exciting opportunity. Thank you. Certainly didn't do that alone. I have two of my board members in the room who were very supportive, and then I'm sure there are others in here that have worked with me on that initiative. But there was a lot to it, a lot of contract reviews, a lot of just figuring out logistics, and there are still some of those things pending. And we've worked with TVA on that, because with their being our power supplier, oddly enough, they're also our regulator. And so there are a lot of things that we work through TVA on. And so they had to really approve the structure of that transaction and say that it fit within our the arrangement of flexibility in the contract, and they did so. And then we also, it is not located, the solar array will not be located in our service territory. So to be able to purchase that power and get it here, we need to ride that on their transmission system. And so we've been working with TVA on that also, which is really important. And the big thing with that, and your question about balancing things, this transaction is near and dear to my heart, and quite frankly, just really important to my organization, because it strikes that perfect balance. It is making us a more sustainable organization while it's saving our ratepayers money. I mean, our customers will save, we will save $5 to $15 million a year on average with that transaction. So we're grateful for the opportunity to move forward with that. At the same time that we took that transaction forward for approval to our board, we also made a recommendation to the board that we utilize the remainder of our 5% flexibility to put in place a program to buy excess energy from our customers' renewable projects. So with the bulk of that being rooftop solar installations. We didn't have anything in place like that. TVA had their own program. They still have this program in place where they would buy excess energy generated by rooftop installations. However, it's at TVA's avoided cost, which as a wholesaler is quite low. We've arranged this to be at our avoided cost, which is quite a bit higher as a retailer. And so we're able to now, if customers have rooftop, and if you have rooftop on your homes, please enroll in our program, and we will buy that excess energy back from you at a higher rate. We're pleased to be able to use our flexibility to do that for customers in our service territory. And just as a plug, since I've now committed my full 5%, I'd like more from TVA.
Call it the flexibility about flexibility program.
That's right. Yeah, it would be remiss if I didn't take advantage of that opportunity, having him sitting here with me. And anytime I run into Jeff Lyash, I tell him that also. So it's not that he's the first person that's hearing this, first time he's hearing it, I'm sure. And part of what drove that rooftop project was a partnership with the city that my friend here next to me will elaborate on more in a moment, but we really wanted to figure out a way to make more of those projects that the city wanted work financially. And another partnership with the city that's been really important that's materialized over the last year was LED streetlight conversion. Really excited about this one. The city had wanted to do this for many, many years, and it's complicated because the city has the obligation to provide the lighting, but NES owns the lighting infrastructure because NES has worked as the contractor for the lighting system for all these years and somewhat financed the lighting system. And so NES owns the lighting infrastructure, but the city wanted to upgrade the lighting infrastructure. So that's kind of complicated. And as we went through our ESG strategy and framework and really evaluated what we needed to prioritize, it became really clear that something that was important to the city needed to be a bigger priority to NES. And so we made it a bigger priority to NES to move forward with, to figure out a way to make that happen. And so after nearly a year negotiating and trying to figure out how we would structure this, we came to something that works well for the city, works well for us. And that contract was approved back in the fall also. And so we have already begun converting the street lights to LEDs. It's a 5-year process, so it's not an overnight conversion, but it will be fantastic when it's done. It's amazing for our community, which is another great balancing act, serving our community, being sustainable and managing cost. And so I think this project also has a feel good on all 3 of those fronts and is a good pillar project to stand behind. And it's super exciting and will make not only will it reduce the city's carbon footprint, it will reduce the city's energy bill dramatically, and it will make our streets and communities safer. Because those lights will be smart. We will know when they're out. People don't have to call to report lights out. So, and they'll have a lot of other smart functionality that will be beneficial to our communities. And I know I'm always run out of time. Tiffany knows this. I speak to her class every once in a while, and I always go over. But one last thing. Following the issues with capacity during Winter Storm Elliott, we have had a strong focus on resiliency efforts and innovation. During 2023, we brought in our first VP over innovation and sustainability and a new sustainability manager within our own workforce, knowing that those things are important and I can't keep pushing all those things by myself. I needed the assistance of professionals who are pretty passionate about it too. And we are revamping our customer service platforms to better assist our customers in managing their energy burden and identifying ways they can reduce their usage. And so we're still working through some of the key pieces of technology that need to go in place for that through a major IT conversion. But I feel like we had a big win recently in drawing attention to customers to the fact that energy conservation isn't that hard. And they really stepped up, our customers really stepped up during this extreme cold weather in January when we made an appeal for customers to curtail their usage. They did it. I mean, we could tell in my conversations with some of the TVA people, they said they could see the impact coming from us on their system, and it was because our customers really responded to that appeal. So I feel like there's a desire and a willingness on the part of our customers to respond to such things. And so I feel like as we roll out, as we upgrade our systems, we're able to send pricing signals and more information to customers. They will probably respond in a similar fashion to save on their own energy bills. And so,
how far away are we from time of use rates for retail customers?
We've designed them. We don't have a system that will build them. That system upgrade we expect should be done in late 2025. Quite honestly, I will go with early. I will go with late 2025.
So I gather this is a software issue?
It is a software issue. Sadly, I shouldn't admit this, but I'm not ashamed of it. We're fixing it. We have a 40-year-old customer information system coded in COBOL. And so we are improving that. We are getting rid of that system and moving to an Oracle billing system that will give us a lot more capabilities. And the big critical piece is it will give us information that our customers can digest, because right now we have a meter data management system we went live with last year. It's sitting there collecting all the meter data, but we can't get it to you yet. And we can't bill you based on that data either. So we're fixing those things.
Thank you. Next, Tiffany Wilmot, who serves as president of Wilmot, Inc. Her organization has made sustainable design contributions to hundreds of projects for clients that include the FDA, General Motors, the U.S. Army, and Coors, and one of her clients is Metro Nashville, which has a 100% clean energy goal. Could you tell us a little bit about how you're working with TVA, NES, and Metro on some of these projects to find a way to meet Metro's 100% renewable energy goal?
Yes, thanks, Jim. And thanks, everyone, for being here. I'm excited to be able to talk to everyone and be up here with this esteemed panel. Pardon?
I'm trying to keep my head out of your slides.
I think you're good. But today, we wanted to look at the state of solar in Nashville. And to answer Jim's question, I'm going to answer it in two ways. First, to look at the cost of solar and how it's come down over the past 12 years. And then I'll give you an example project that Teresa just mentioned of the Metro Solar project. So first, you can see here, and you all being in this business, you know these prices have come down by leaps and bounds, 80% since 2010. So, and I see some of my students in the classroom. I do run a sustainability company, but I also teach a class here, and so I'm glad to see you all here today, and you can answer some of my questions later. Anyway, this is a huge opportunity for all of us because costs have decreased by 80%, making solar not only affordable, but now the most cost-effective source of power there is, above and beyond fossil fuels, which gives us opportunities for things like programs like this. This is Nokian Tire Plant in Dayton, Tennessee, and if it's a 3 megawatt solar array. So does anyone know how many acres a megawatt is? Just for what? 7, 2, 7. Okay, we're going to go with 5. It waxes and wanes. We're going to say 5. So 3 megawatts is 15 acres. And so that is a pretty big array. The cool thing about this one is that it's a canopy solar. So the tire trucks can park underneath the canopy and be shaded. It also shades the hardscape, so they get extra points for their lead building, and just keeps those cars cool, and then they don't have to run their air conditioning as much in the summer. So it's kind of a double bonus. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the solar project that Teresa mentioned. So this project came about because Mayor O'Connell, when he was council member O'Connell, put forth a requirement that we are trying to meet a renewable portfolio standard, an RPS, of 100% renewable energy by 2041. So to do that, we're contracted by the city to look at 600 buildings throughout the city that are owned by Metro where we could put solar. And to do that, it will have what's called distributed energy. And distributed energy, does everyone know what distributed energy is? It's the energy on lots of small, I'm not Italian, but I do use my hands. Lots of smaller distributed locations. I wish I were Italian. I'd love to just be more effervescent. So distributed versus utility is super important to understand, and it's important in this context because we need both. Like it's not either or one's better than the other. Utility scale is a megawatt or larger. It could be 5 megawatts, 100 megawatts. The largest array I know about is 580 megawatts in California. But then the distributed ones, the little small ones that could be rooftops, it could be battery supply, those usually are used behind the meter right in that building so you don't have the line loss. And if there's a crisis, a tornado, and something gets hit, they all don't get hit, right? So it gives us more resiliency. And both of them give us resiliency because we're adding to the grid. So those are pretty important. So this is what we did. I know you can't read this, but I just wanted you to see what we did. We looked at, it looks at like the exact location, the roof age, the orientation, electrical equipment inventory, a helioscope, which is a modeling software, and lots of other factors. And then for each of the locations, we came up with this. And this is a model that took a huge amount of effort from Metro as well. We talked with general services and schools and police and fire and all the different departments to talk to them about what they had and how much we could put on their rooftops. So here's a quick example. Those little blue rectangles are where you can put solar. And I showed you this one because right now we can install 41 kilowatts, it's not a huge one, here, but once this roof up here is redone in 2033, then we'll be able to add more solar to it. So we tried to put it together so that it could be a long-term plan. This one is actually a little bit better for solar. It's 1.3 megawatts, so this one has more opportunity. So you're probably wondering, you looked at all these 600 sites, you came up with 235 that were great, 100 megawatts, that sounds awesome, but what does it cost, right? So, and that's where we had to work with the TVA and NES and Metro and have everybody happy about it. So the good news is that over time, over the life of the installations, will save $80 million. We will be more sustainable. We will not be using fossil fuels as much for our power in Metro. And that could not have been done without teamwork. There was a lot of working to get to this point. And it not only the people up here, but Ann Davis and people working, and David Adams, people working on this as a team and like trying to come up with the best thing for everyone. We all want the best, right? So the city has begun the process. It's been funded, and we're going to save money. We're going to show leadership, and we're going to lower peak demand, which also increases resiliency. And because electricity demand is increasing, and it's hugely increasing because of EVs and electrification of buildings, this will be great to reduce the load for NES and in turn for TVA. So everybody wins in this case. And our tagline for our company is smart decisions, real results. And I think in this case, that really came through. That's the end of my presentation, but I wanted to just finally say that that without all of you in the room trying and working on this, none of this would have happened. Like, it takes all of us, and there aren't very many of us out there, right? There aren't very many sustainability professionals in the world. We're kind of a tight-knit, small group, and we all kind of know each other and try to help each other. And I love that because there's not a lot of competition. We're all trying to help each other, and we're all trying to make this better. After 30 years of being president of a sustainability company, I can say that I have seen a huge difference happen over these years. At the beginning, people would always say, like, what the hell are you doing? Why are you, like, how did you think of this business, And now people are calling us, so it's kind of awesome. Although I'm now ready to retire, so, but maybe the next generation can take it over for us, and we can help them be the best they can be. So thank you so much.
Tiffany, if I could ask a quick follow-up question. I really applaud the city of Nashville's goals here to be 100% renewable in terms of what they're consuming. Do you know how much of NES's demand is represented by Metro Nashville as opposed to other customers? I'm just curious.
Not off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I think it's a really small percentage. I think it's less than 5%. I think it's like 4.5%. Dave, am I right? Yeah, it's about 4.5%. So it's a step, and it's the government saying our buildings are going to be carbon neutral, but we want everybody, and it is renewables. It's 100% solar is the requirement.
Sure.
So it's not just carbon.
And, I think the overall ambition is exciting. How many has Metro done this on some of its buildings, and what would be the exemplars
Yes.
so far?
So, yes, that's good questions. Yeah, I thought you were going to give me softballs. So,
this is easy.
Metro Water has already started. They have 4 megawatts. They're going to have 10 pretty soon. And they're going for 20 megawatts. And then there are 2 schools that have funded the work coming up this year, and they're going to put money in every year to fund a little bit more. I didn't go into this, but we also have this other way of doing things where we have a third party can come in and pay for the schools or any of the projects, and they would own and operate those solar arrays, and then they would just the buildings would then lease back that equipment to get the power. So there's a way to do it where the city isn't even out any money up front if they want to do it that way.
Yeah, that's exciting, and I know under the Inflation Reduction Act, there are some opportunities for direct financing.
Yes,
that would let some of the
huge.
tax credits flow back to these third-party developers. Because
Exactly.
the city doesn't get the tax credit.
Well,
right?
the city
So-
can get it now. So yes,
Okay,
good
okay.
point. So it used to be that you couldn't, if you were a nonprofit, a church, a school, a city, you couldn't get the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act credits, but now you can. It's called direct pay, and actually TVA gets it also. But they'll be paid directly back for that 30%, which is making it really cost effective. So great question, thank you.
Exciting. Okay, well, next we're going to hear from Dr. Stephen Smith, who since 1993 has served as Executive Director of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, which, of course, serves as the premier voice for clean energy issues in the southeastern region. Dr. Smith, how can we improve consideration of environmental values overall in the regional and local energy planning process, especially given that, I think part of what we've heard about so far is that financial cost and reliability tend to drive things here. How do we bring sustainability up to par with those other goals?
Right, great. Well, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here, and appreciate the conference and all the great presentations that are happening. I grew up in Nashville and have family ties to Vanderbilt. Both my dad and my grandfather went here, and it's a great school, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Let me frame it just a little bit different, because there's wonderful stories going on, and I in no way want to diminish the very important work that's going on, but I also think that we have to be realistic about the sort of contextual situation we're in. I tell my staff that we're in both kind of the worst of times, the challenging times, and the best of times, and you've got to hold those simultaneously together. Anybody who's paying attention to what's happening across the globe right now, we had a question earlier about climate change, it is a fundamental transition that's happening in our planet right now at a scale that we've never seen before as humans. You look at the parade of horribles that goes across your social media feed, if you're tuned into it, the stories, curtain of forest fires across Canada, fires were in Australia, the fires in Chile, you've seen the fires in the United States, the hydrological events that are being unleashed, both extreme drought and these sort of rain bombs, these rivers that we're seeing that set up in the atmosphere now. the destabilization of the jet streams, and we're seeing these sort of polar swings that are highly unusual. You're seeing the sea level rise, you're seeing the ocean acidification. I could go on and on and on. And these are fundamental challenges at the very core of our future. I've got kids and grandkids, and I've got staff, and we talk about what is the challenge for the next generation. I'm setting this up because the question, lots of times, is that cost, reliability, and things around the environment are somehow on an absolute sort of even footing. We've got to figure out how to balance it. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe there are some things that are more even fundamental. Some people have talked a little bit about culture shifts. It may actually be shifts in worldview, shift in understanding that we're going to have to get at. So the best of times, we're seeing more solar being deployed at levels. I can remember the first time working with TVA when I begged them to get the first megawatt of solar on the TVA grid. I could still remember that back when we were doing these, funny things about having to do green power pricing, get people to pay extra to get a little bit of renewables on the grid and all this other kind of stuff, green power switch and all these other kind of things, begging to get them to do the first wind turbines, begging them to get to do things. Now we're seeing solar being deployed, not necessarily in the Tennessee Valley at the scale it needs to be, but we're seeing across the country it being deployed, and we're seeing growth. The Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure bills that passed, these are historic. For a lot of us in the environmental community, it's like we're the dog that caught the car now. This is fundamentally changing the debate and how it goes. Now, there's an election, some of you have heard about later this year, that could claw back some of that. We'll see. You've got to be civically engaged if you're committed to these issues, because not everybody that's running for that office sees the world the same way. But we're seeing fundamental opportunities. I will give TVA credit. I've been a long student of TVA, bloodied my forehead on the gates of TVA for years. They now have, in the Southeast, the lowest carbon emissions on a pounds per megawatt hour. That means per unit of energy, carbon being done. They were one of the worst at some time. They were at one point emitting over 100 million metric tons of carbon into the atmosphere every freaking year. I mean, phenomenal amount. They have cut that significantly down, Joe can probably answer this right off the top of his head. I would say, 45, 50 million metric tons now, getting in that range. 50 going on 60%. That deserves credit, okay? But they didn't do it because of climate change. They kind of got in there for an accident. I could go into the history of how they ended up with the nuclear power plants they ended up with. I could go into a long history about, fracking, which is allowing us to have access to fossil gas that has basically broke the back of the coal industry, which actually led TVA primarily to basically retire a lot of their coal plants. It isn't necessarily been driven historically or long-term about carbon emissions. And as Joe admitted, they don't have a plan to get 100%. They've got, an aspirational goal. They've got talk. Is it complicated? Yes, but I don't believe it's as complicated as it is made out to be. And I'm not saying that naively, because we're looking at what other utilities can do. My organization, the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, we do regional work from Florida, the Carolinas, Georgia, and then the TVA region, all across the region, dealing with lots of investor-owned utilities, some of the largest energy companies literally in the world. When you look at Southern Company, you look at Duke Energy, you look at NextEra, which is the owner of Florida Power and Light. And then you have this unicorn that is this thing called the Tennessee Valley Authority. That is not an investor-owned utility. It is a federal corporation. There is nothing else like it anywhere in the United States. No, can't find anything else like it at all. And we'll get into that just a little bit more. So when we look at what the ambition that we're seeing from other utilities and what we're seeing being deployed and the technology that's being deployed, we don't see that same level of ambition going forward. Yes, let's applaud TVA for where they've gotten. But we're not going to sit here and look in the rearview mirror to solve the climate crisis. We've got to be going ahead, and we've got to be aggressively going ahead, and we've got to have a scale of ambition that is commensurate to the problem. Several people on the panels before said, pay attention to the science. We are not bending the carbon curve at the scale that we need to. It's not happening, folks. It is, in some ways, it's actually, the pandemic helped at some level in a weird way, but it's actually returning and we're climbing. And we're seeing carbon emissions continuing to climb. Our organization has a notion that the primary driver of climate is how we produce and consume energy. And I would argue that with anybody. That is the fundamental driver of climate change, how we produce and consume energy. And in our region, the dominant player for that, because of the way this structure has been set up, is the Tennessee Valley Authority. They have 153 captive local power companies. And I use the word captive as if bound by chain because they have these 20-year evergreen contracts that completely limit what these local power companies can do. Now, 5%, applaud it. I'm glad you asked Joe for more. But what does that mean? That means 95% is coming from TVA. Is that flexibility? Yeah, it's a start. It gives them a chance to play around. But where's the ambition? Because TVA doesn't have the ambition to accelerate. They need to let their LPCs have more freedom to pursue this, particularly when a place like Nashville that has progressive goals to try to do this, TVA should not be interfering with that. They should be releasing the chains, letting that go, letting the community move as fast as possible. Now, I could go on. I could get Italian and start waving my hands, I believe you me. But let me say this. The one thing that is happening at this moment that is real, that I think is just absolutely exemplary of the challenge we have, TVA is doing an integrated resource plan. Integrated resource planning is where you look out over the horizon the next 10, 20 years, you're planning your resources, looking at both the demand side and the supply side, you're looking at risk, you're looking at benefits, you're looking at all this. TVA is the largest public, I put that in quotes, utility in the United States. They have the least public planning process of any utility in the United States. When we go to Georgia Power, when we go to Duke Energy, when we go into South Carolina and we intervene with state-level regulatory commissions, we get standing, we intervene as interveners, we can bring utility representatives up on basically the stand under oath and have them provide information. We have fundamental access to the decision-making that's going on there. And we can engage at a level that you cannot engage with the Tennessee Valley Authority. TVA handpicks who's on the panels. They've controlled the flow of information. They conflate the National Environmental Policy Act, which is an environmental law largely administered by the Office of Environmental Quality, with deep regulatory commitment. TVA's board is appointed by the President of the United States, but TVA is a self-regulated federal monopoly who is accountable to no one. No one. There has not been an oversight hearing in Congress since I testified after the Kingston Coal Ash Spill in 2009 by any of the regulatory committees, oversight committees at TVA. A true oversight hearing, not confirmation for the board, a true oversight hearing. The LPCs have very limited control because they are bound to these 20-year contracts. And you look at how do we get, when you get an insular group of decision makers at the top that have an echo chamber, you cut off the flow of information that gets there because you don't have an open process to be able to bring forth different ideas. So people who have a different perspective on how serious climate change is do not get to the real powers of decision making at the top of the agency. I'm just naming it, okay, for what it really is. And I have a number of years of experience. I've been on the inside with TVA. They let me in. I've seen how that's done. They don't do it anymore. And so, you know, it's just the way it is. And so I think we've got to name it and call it out, and we've got to get our largest public power entity, it is our federal utility, should have the aspiration to be absolutely at the forefront of solving the climate crisis. That is what we need.
Thanks. Thanks, Stephen. So the dog caught the car, but the car is still moving. I think it's part of the problem. Next, we've been talking about hearing from a scientist, and now we're going to hear from a real research scientist, though we have other scientists on the panel as well. Dr. Tina Hartert is the Lulu Owen Professor of Medicine and Pediatrics at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. I'll let her talk about some of her projects, but let me just cue it up by asking the question, what are we learning through scientific research about the connections between energy and human well-being?
That is a softball. So the first thing I just want to comment on, for everybody who's here, is why we should care about this. I've been interestingly to listen to everyone. There is so much value added to think about the health benefits that come from what everybody on this panel is talking about. And so if you think what I'm going to say may or may not be useful, what I would just emphasize is I think sometimes we don't talk about the benefits of health that come from many of these initiatives. So I want to make 3 points today. Maybe they're relatively simplistic, but I'm going to ask you 3 multiple choice questions to make these points. So the first thing I just want to ask this group is whether you're aware of whether there actually are data that support causal links between pollution, climate, and health outcomes. Is it? Yeah, that's great. Last year I asked a question that no one in the room got right, so I thought, well, I at least need to ask a question that a quarter of the people in here get correct. And that's true. There's an abundance of data that link air pollution, climate change to adverse health outcomes, mortality and health outcomes. We're particularly interested in maternal child health outcomes, but almost anything that we measure, there are significant adverse effects. So when we alter and we decrease the effects, the pollution, we improve indoor air quality as well as outdoor air quality, we significantly improve health outcomes. And I would say these aren't just association studies, and you may think this sounds very archaic, but these are studies where we biologically actually understand what's happening as well. So we take individuals and we put them in chambers and we actually expose them to individual pollutants, and we understand what these pollutants actually do to people biologically and physiologically as well. So there's an abundance of data to support that there are adverse health outcomes, and when you improve things such as decrease pollution, improve indoor air quality, you improve health outcomes. So the second question I want to ask you is, globally, as a high-income country, we have good health outcomes and low pollution compared with low-income countries and other high-income countries. False. Yeah, almost everyone got that one correct. That's true. You know, we are a high-income country. We spend an incredible amount of money on healthcare, and I would like to believe as a physician that makes a great deal of difference, but we have some of the worst health outcomes actually in the world. We're well below many other high-income countries. In fact, we're well below a number of middle and low-income countries, and particularly when we look at things like maternal child health. And not only are we lower than many other high-income and middle and low-income countries, Tennessee is one of the worst states in the United States. So last year, as an example, the March of Dimes maternal child health record, we got a D- in Tennessee. And not only a D-, like smack dab in the middle of D-, we were 1 point away from being an F. So we have terrible health outcomes in our state. And we know from a report that was released last week that we have one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the United States as well. And the other point that's important to know is not only do we have these adverse outcomes, they don't impact all populations equally. So the next point, or the next question that I just want to ask you is, While there are well-recognized health inequities across the world, if we look at health outcomes in Africa compared to the US, these don't exist within the US. Yeah, that's false as well. So we know within our own state that when I talk about health outcomes, even health outcomes within our city, they're not equally distributed. And I think the question I asked last year that actually no one got right was I asked, what is the greatest indicator actually of your health and mortality risk? And it's your zip code. Oh, there's some people here who remember the answer. And that is true. It's true across the world, but it's true within our own city as well. And we recently actually participated in a study where we looked at the impact actually of decreased pollution over time, in part from the Clean Air Act, within a number of cities across the United States. And while we see decreases in pollution and their impact on health over time, and in most cities there are parallel decreases in most areas of the city, unfortunately in Nashville, the biggest improvements and decreases in pollution are in high-income zip codes. And that discrepancy or inequity is only increasing over time in our city, unlike many of our peer cities. So these inequities that relate to the impacts of pollution we see across the world. We see them within our own city. And what we know is that the populations actually who suffer the most actually from the impacts of pollution and climate change actually produce the least amount of pollution and impact climate change the least. So lastly, my fourth point isn't a question, but it's really just a concluding comment, and that is that energy efficiency absolutely can impact health. I think it's something that we don't use often enough. I think it's generally not politicized like other things are, although I would have liked to have said that about COVID and science until a few years ago. I've been doing this a while. But I think we don't use it enough in selling the potential impacts, actually, of energy efficiency, decreasing pollution, and the important impact that climate is going to have. And the other important point is that there are tremendous inequities as well. So as we improve and decrease impacts of pollution and climate, we have to remember the really vulnerable populations across the world that impact all of our lives. And it really is both a moral and professional imperative for all of us who have interests in human health.
Thank you, Tina. And to bring this full circle, I was really struck by this morning's report on the state of energy in Tennessee, that some of the communities that you're mentioning that would suffer the greatest impact are also bearing the greatest energy burden, right? So that's something we ought to be thinking about in this transition as well. Well, I've got a million questions, but I'm not going to ask them. I'm going to open it up to the audience to ask some hardball questions in contrast to the softball questions I've asked so far to get things going. Why don't we start with Linda here? Yeah.
A quick question and a comment. Is there a good set of succinct talking points on this that we could share very widely with people working in the environmental space? Because we all kind of know this, but we kind of don't have, is there somewhere to go?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, so much, unfortunately, the short answer is no. I think it's actually an incredibly important resource to have something like this. And I think one of the major reasons is that most of this research by researchers like myself are usually done in the context of the disease they're interested in. So yes, if you ask me about maternal child health and asthma, yes, we have all of these talking points. The American Lung Association puts out a fabulous document every once in a while that covers these, but it's very focused in respiratory health. So I think it is something that would be tremendously useful. I didn't comment, I talked a little bit about this last year, but Mike and I have a grant together actually looking at the impact of some of this, because I think actually having data that's right in your own backyard that you can present to your mayor's office or to your state, I think is really impactful, and that's a major reason for some of the work that we're actually doing together.
Because I think a lot of us are lawyers and policy people, but we don't feel as comfortable in the science realm, and so we just kind of like give a nod to it, but we don't. And then my next question is, why in Nashville are the wealthy zip
Yeah, so we've seen, I will go back to your question about one of my favorite scientific journals, the New York Times and the Washington Post, sometimes actually do absolutely the best in talking points on the impact of pollution and climate change on health.
And just something we're doing together, just a worthy point, I think, is that we included some questions in John Deere's periodic survey, the Vanderbilt poll on EVs, and we found people don't know they're cheaper to operate, they don't know that they don't have tailpipe emission, they don't know that they're lower CO2. And so a lot of what we're trying to do together is at a zip code and very fine-grained basis, provide the kind of information that a policymaker could come into a neighborhood and inform people of something that they just don't know.
Yeah, I'd add real quick that we got a grant from the Department of Energy to do some transportation equity work in Georgia, which is right at this point where you don't want significant segments of the population to be completely left behind, because we are in a truly transformational, I think the proverbial horse has left the barn on EVs. Now there's going to be waxing, waning here and there, but we're heading that way, we're going that way, and I think we've got to make sure that we really do help people understand in the communities so that no community is left behind on those issues.
Yes.
So Linda, to answer,
Sorry.
I was going to actually answer Linda's question. So a lot of it is the history of our country. So we've historically segregated populations. The homeowner loan corporation, when we did redlining in the 1930s, created communities that couldn't financially obtain home ownership. They were degraded in value, and we know many of our roadways are built right next to those communities, factories are built next to those communities, dumps are next to those communities. And so when we look at the impact of decreasing pollution, yes, we've had a decrease everywhere over time. I don't want to interpret what I said as that we haven't seen a decrease everywhere, but at least in our city, the greatest improvements in decrease in pollution are in the highest income areas, and the lowest improvements are still in populations where there's a larger proportion of the populations that live below poverty.
Yes, go ahead.
The question I have is about concerns the replacement of coal-fired plants with gas-fired plants. TVA is doing it, other utilities as well. The leakage rate of 4% means that in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, we've done no better than allowing the coal plant to remain in active use. So the question is, what does TVA and other power generators in particular who want to go about this ensure that the leakage rate meets the EPA standard of 1%, and that would be from the Permian Basin where you mine it. Yep. You don't mine gas, you frack it out of the ground, but through the transport chain to your supply system before it gets into the turbine and the gas-fired boiler that you use for energy. How do you ensure that, and how do you pressure your suppliers to enforce that?
Yeah, I think, sorry, that's a really good question. And I think there's sort of three components to it. So the first component's technical, right? And so there's a number of large efforts going on between EPRI and GTI and the gas producers and the utilities to actually understand what are the causes of the leakages in there, and from a technical standpoint, what physically has to be done in order to stop that, right? And then what is the monitoring that has to go on in order to ensure that that's happened, right? That you don't get a leak. So there's a lot of money being spent. Some of the money in the IIJA, there's grant money that's also going to some of those efforts to try to understand that. So that's number one. The second one is contractual, right? So TVA is already working with our suppliers to require of them that they hit a certain standard inside their contract to us. Now you got to go back to number one before I can enforce number two, because I got to be able to monitor it, but that's ongoing, right, to be able to address that. Then the third issue is, where do we go with gas in the long run, right? We I think, fundamentally believe, at least for the next 20 to 30 years, gas is going to have to play a role as the solar, as the storage, as the transmission becomes more available to get the energy in the right place. So we've effectively got to start doing carbon capture on these bigger plants. The technology for the carbon capture is actually now becoming quite viable. It's still not cheap, but it's quite viable. The biggest challenge now is what do you do with it once you get it, right? So obvious thing everybody does is, we'll put it back in the ground, sequester it. Yeah, just for the Tennessee Valley, there isn't any good space here. We've done the analysis around here. There are some good basins down toward Mississippi. There's some good basins up toward Kentucky. But the reality is what you need to do is make something out of it that's useful, right? So whether that's a biofuel that you could use in heavy transportation to move ships or planes or whatever, there's a lot of work being done in that. There's a number of companies looking at, could you take the carbon, turn it into things like carbon fiber and other things for construction materials, right? So you move away from using metals, you move away from using wood, that kind of thing, which have all got great potential, but technically are very nascent, and there's no markets anywhere for it. So it's a long road we're gonna have to build, but I think that's critical going forward.
Joe, as a quick follow-up to that, what does TVA see, if anything, as the role of hydrogen in the natural gas transition?
Yeah, another good question. So TVA actually, along with Southern Company and Dominion and Duke, applied for one of the hydrogen hubs. Unfortunately, we were not selected, but we all collectively think hydrogen is important in several areas. One is in the transportation space, particularly until the battery technologies mature from where they are today. If you think about heavy-duty trucks, you think about trains, ships, airplanes. Batteries for them, at least in the short run, are not going to be effective. So hydrogen plays a potential role there to fill that. The second is in large industrial processes, because there's a lot of industrial processes that if they had hydrogen at volume, they can change what they do and decarbonize both the chemical process they do and the energy that they're using to manipulate the process. So we're still, even though we weren't selected by DOE, we are still looking at how to begin to actually produce hydrogen and how to begin to develop markets in the Tennessee Valley.
One more question, and then we're going to move on to the next panel. Yes?
Well, I'll start because in fact, I was talking with somebody at the break. A few things I think that are correct here. The utility industry is definitely one of your primary emitters of CO2. The utility industry has to get rid of the CO2 in order to make significant progress against climate change. Other sectors of the economy also have to do that same thing. But it's not just about the technology. It's not just about whether we deploy solar or how fast we deploy solar. It's about the entire ecosystem around which we operate and how we produce. So, and Stephen said this, we don't have a culture set up right now to want to shift in this direction. So we need people to help us figure that out, and how do we create that? How do we create then the policies that drive that? If you were to tell us today, money is no option, reliability is no option, go do this, I can't get the materials. They don't exist at scale in order to be able to build these things. We are creating policies for ourselves around the world right now that are limiting what we can get from other countries. So that makes it even more difficult. And lastly, we don't have the workforce. Right? We need everything from lawyers to engineers to welders if we're going to put this together, and we got to put a concerted effort in focusing on that. The one thing I think that Stephen and I might agree on is this is a crisis unlike nobody has ever seen ever. And we're not treating it that way. And until we get focused as a country, which means all of us have to figure out how to work together, it's going to be very difficult to make meaningful progress.
I thought you were going to say Mahomes or something.
Just real quick.
So with that, I want to thank the panel. And